The morning sun glinted off the Mediterranean as Arius made his way through the narrow streets. Vendors hawked their wares: fresh fish, spices from Arabia, linens from Gaul. But the presbyter paid them no heed. His mind focused on the momentous events about to unfold. As he approached the bishop's residence, Arius saw his rival Athanasius emerge from within, the young deacon's face set in grim determination. The two men locked eyes for a moment, an unspoken challenge passing between them. Then Athanasius strode off, his coterie of supporters trailing behind. Arius allowed himself a small, wry smile. Let the upstart have his moment of pride. By day's end, it would be Arius vindicated, his logos theology triumphant. He ascended the steps and entered to take his place among the gathering Egyptian bishops. Bishop Alexander called the council to order, his drawn face belying his attempts at calm authority. He began by recounting the simmering theological disputes that had necessitated this unprecedented assembly. Many looked askance at Arius as Alexander described the controversial teachings that had earned the presbyter condemnation and exile. "Let Arius step forward to answer these charges," Alexander intoned. Arius rose, squaring his shoulders as he faced the hostile stares. He would not shrink from defending the truths that had been revealed to him. "Most reverend fathers, what I teach is no heresy, but the very doctrines espoused by our forefathers in the faith." Arius's voice rang out strong and clear. "I affirm the oneness and absolute transcendence of Almighty God. Therefore, while the Son is divine, he cannot be co-eternal with the Father. There was when he was not." Angry murmurs rippled through the bishops at this audacious pronouncement. Arius continued undeterred. "The Son is not of the same essence as the Father, but was begotten at a point in time as the first and greatest of God's creations. Only in this way can the Son truly serve as the bridge between God and the created order." Athanasius could contain himself no longer. He leapt to his feet, stabbing an accusing finger at Arius. "Heretic! Blasphemer! You presume to make the eternal Word a mere creature, unequal to the Father. What use is such a feeble, changeable demiurge for the salvation of mankind?" Arius smiled sadly at the younger man's impetuousness. "You mistake me, Athanasius. I proclaim the glory and supremacy of the Son as the agent of creation and redemption. But the Son's nature must be distinct from the Father's, lest we lapse into the errors of Sabellius and affirm a divine monad with no true persons." Other presbyters joined the fray, hurling scriptural texts back and forth, voices rising in rancorous debate. Alexander called repeatedly for order, but the council had descended into chaos. Finally, the bishop authorized a vote to settle the matter. To Arius's dismay, only a handful stood with him. His enemies had arrayed themselves in a solid block. Arius bowed his head as the condemnations rained down. "Anathema! Let him be excommunicated." Alexander's declaration of his expulsion from the church was almost lost in the tumult. Seeing the triumph in Athanasius's eyes, Arius felt his heart fill with icy resolve. This fight was far from over. Word of the Alexandrian Council's verdict spread like wildfire. As Arius took shelter with his friend Eusebius, bishop of the eastern capital Nicomedia, letters flew back and forth across the Mediterranean. Eusebius and other powerful eastern bishops castigated Alexander for his treatment of Arius and demanded his reinstatement. Alexander retaliated with accusations of apostasy. The simmering tensions between word of the Alexandrian Council's verdict spread like wildfire. As Arius took shelter with his friend Eusebius, bishop of the eastern capital Nicomedia, letters flew back and forth across the Mediterranean. Eusebius and other powerful eastern bishops castigated Alexander for his treatment of Arius and demanded his reinstatement. Alexander retaliated with accusations of apostasy. The simmering tensions between the Eastern and Egyptian churches threatened to boil over into schism. Appeals from both sides flew to the imperial court, each faction painting its opponents as dangerous heretics threatening the peace of the empire. Emperor Constantine, basking in his recent victory over Licinius that had made him sole ruler of the Roman world, could not ignore this new threat. He dispatched his trusted advisor Bishop Hosius to Alexandria. bearing a letter urging the feuding clerics to put aside their differences for the unity of the church. Hosius convened another council, listening as the Arian and Athanasian factions made their cases. The emissary was astonished at the passions the arcane theological dispute had aroused. Barbarian armies were gathering at the empire's frontiers, and noble families still clung to the old gods. Could the church not see the folly of tearing itself apart over how many persons danced on the head of a pin? Even Hosius's diplomatic skills could not overcome the uncompromising stances on both sides. Arius continued to insist the Father and Son were not of the same essence, much to Alexander's outrage. With a heavy heart, Hosius penned his report to Constantine. The rift in the Egyptian church was too deep to mend. The emperor would need to intervene directly to impose a resolution and enforce doctrinal unity. Arius knew what awaited upon Hosius's return. With bitterness, he composed a final message to be disseminated among his disciples. Brothers, you must continue the true faith, though the forces of the world array themselves against you. I go to make our case before the emperor himself. Pray that God grants him wisdom to discern the eternal truth of the Logos. Embracing Eusebius one last time, Arius boarded the ship that would take him to his fateful confrontation. As the sun set over the wine-dark sea, he whispered the comforting words of the 255th Psalm. Our bones are scattered at the grave's mouth, as when one cutteth and cleaveth wood upon the earth. But mine eyes are unto thee, O God the Lord. In thee is my trust. Leave not my soul destitute. As Arius made his way to the imperial villa, he couldn't help but marvel at how simple presbyter like himself had become the focus of a controversy embroiling the entire Christian world. His Alexandrian opponents had painted him as a dangerous radical, but in truth Arius saw himself as simply upholding the faith handed down from the apostles. How could the Son be of the same essence as the ungenerate Father? Such a doctrine seemed to veer uncomfortably close to the old pagan heresies of gods begetting gods. No, there had to be a distinction between the Almighty and the Logos through whom he had made the worlds. To proclaim their unity of essence was to risk seeing Christ as a mere emanation or mode of the Father rather than a truly personal being. Ironically, the very error of which the Athanasians accused him. Arius knew that Constantine too ultimately desired unity and peace for the increasingly fractious church. But the emperor was not a theologian. Arius would need to make the stakes in the debate crystal clear. At best, the Athanasian position flirted with crypto-Sabellian heresy. At worst, equating the Father and Son raised the specter of polytheism, providing fuel for pagan critics eager to portray Christianity as no better than the cults of the Olympians. Despite the opposition of the powerful Alexandrian see, Arius was confident he could make the emperor see reason. Were not the bishops of the East already sympathetic to his cause? But as soon as he entered the audience chamber, Arius perceived that his enemies had outmaneuvered him once again. The imperious Bishop Hosius stood at Constantine's right hand, a scowl of condemnation clouding his hawkish face. To the emperor's left sat none other than Athanasius, his rival's presence signaling that the Alexandrians' reach now extended all the way to the imperial throne. Constantine gestured impatiently for him to kneel. Arius did so, catching Athanasius's smug expression as he bowed his head. Hosius then read out a pre-prepared statement in the emperor's name. Know that we are gravely displeased with the ongoing discord and strife afflicting the Holy Church. The impious doctrines of the presbyter Arius have been judged heretical by the bishops gathered in Holy Synod. Yet he persists in defiance, spreading confusion and faction throughout the East. We desire all our subjects to worship the divine in unity, not sundered by theological speculation. There was an odd note in Constantine's voice, as if he found the notion of Christians squabbling over doctrine faintly absurd. The emperor fixed Arius with a commanding glare. You are to cease disseminating these controversial teachings at once. Reconcile yourself to Bishop Alexander's authority and keep the peace, or face a charge of sedition. We will tolerate no further unrest in the church. Arius fought to control his expression at this request. No, this imperial command, to repudiate his life's work, to deny the very truths of the Logos that burned within him. Athanasius was trying not to grin at the emperor's ultimatum. Eusebius had warned him that the young Alexandrian was an operator, but even Arius had not suspected him capable of such skillful manipulation of the imperial court. The emperor clearly considered the matter settled. Rising stiffly from his obeisance, Arius knew there was nothing more he could say. He had come to illuminate the truth, but Constantine had already been poisoned against him. Athanasius would see him forced into exile or worse. As he was solemnly escorted from the emperor's presence, Arius whispered an urgent prayer. The world's powers were aligning against the true faith. Athanasius's influence grew by the day. If the church was to be saved from heresy and strife, Arius would need to defy an emperor. The city writhed in turmoil, as if the desert sands blown in by the Khamsin winds had scoured away the veneer of peace and exposed the seething tensions underneath. In the 6 years since that fateful imperial audience, the theological conflict over the nature of the Logos had only heightened. Reunited with his flock, Arius had at first been circumspect, avoiding overt confrontation with Bishop Alexander. But Athanasius, now a rising force in the Alexandrian Church, refused to let the matter rest. Again and again he denounced Arius, rallying the people with fiery condemnations of the logomachy that denied the Son's co-equality with the Father. Arius could not long keep silent. The truth bade him speak. Soon the rival doctrines were openly debated in the agora and lecture halls, dividing Alexandria's Christians into increasingly militant Arian and Athanasian factions. Riots erupted as gangs of zealots clashed in the streets. Outraged reports flooded the imperial court. The Alexandrian Church was tearing itself apart. The last missive from Constantine took on an ominous tone. No more would the emperor brook these unseemly divisions. He was convening a great council of bishops from throughout the empire, the first of its kind, to definitively resolve the theological dispute. Lest any doubt his will, the summons would be borne by imperial troops. One way or another, the Alexandrians would fall into line. Athanasius preened at this news, certain his doctrine of the Son's consubstantiality would be vindicated. Had he not already won over Hosius and other key imperial advisors? Arius alone in the city seemed unperturbed. "Our case will be heard before the bishops of the world," he assured his followers. "The truth of the Logos cannot be suppressed." But as the Alexandrian delegation made its way to the appointed site of Nicaea, Arius was increasingly troubled. At every stop, it seemed Athanasius and his partisans had been there before them, whipping up support for their hardline views. With a sinking heart, Arius recognized the skill with which the younger cleric had orchestrated his campaign. Athanasius had placed himself as the upholder of Christological orthodoxy, painting the Arians as dangerous innovators. The rhetorical trap had been laid. From the opening procession, the council unfolded as an implicit referendum on the Alexandrian presbyter and his teachings. Speaker after speaker rose to denounce Arianism, each anathema more thunderous than the last. Only a handful of Eastern bishops dared defend him. The proceedings became mere theater, a ritual display of anti-Arian fervor to curry the emperor's favor. Few of the Western bishops even understood the subtle metaphysical points at issue. Constantine himself set the tone. He wanted a creed to unify the church, not more tiresome debate, and he clearly expected it to be an Athanasian one. Arius watched numbly as a statement declaring the Son consubstantial with the Father was drafted. Dissenting voices cowed into silence. In a final flourish, Hosius appended a string of anathemas against Arius's own teachings. As the bishops lined up to sign the document one by one, each casting a baleful glance at Arius, he felt an icy clarity descend. He could bend his knee before the emperor, repudiate his life's work, embrace Athanasius's doctrines, and live out his days as a broken husk of a theologian. Or he could defy this coerced consensus and accept the consequences, carrying the truth of the Logos into exile. In the end, it was no choice at all. As the proceedings drew to a close, Arius stood alone in refusing to endorse the Nicene Creed. The sentence was as expected: immediate banishment beyond the empire's borders. He had mere days to bid farewell to his flock and arrange his affairs. Athanasius sought him out as he prepared to depart Alexandria one last time. The younger man's face shone with triumph, but there was a hint of pity in his eyes. You could have been a pillar of the church, Arius. Why persist in this folly? Embrace the true faith decreed at Nicaea. Arius shook his head slowly. Because it is not the true faith, Athanasius. You have maneuvered mightily to suppress the authentic Logos theology. But the truth cannot be buried forever. Others will take up the cause long after I am gone. Athanasius's eyes flashed. Then they too will be condemned as heretics. Arius simply smiled. The emperor's rulings are not infallible, nor even those of councils. You have won a battle, nothing more. I have achieved a unity of doctrine that will endure for ages, and I have kept the faith, though I am reviled by all. That is enough. With a final nod, Arius set out, a band of disciples accompanying their teacher into exile. Athanasius watched him go, face darkening. Many trials still lay ahead to secure his view as orthodoxy. But for now, the Alexandrian could savor his victory. The emperor was with him, and Arius's heresy had been purged from the church. Little could he imagine that the old man's vow would prove true, that the Arian doctrine would persist, waxing and waning for generations, dividing the imperial church and even winning the adherence of emperors. Only after decades of strife would Nicene Christianity emerge triumphant and uncontested as Athanasius's lasting legacy. Arius himself would not live to see that final struggle. But as he and his band journeyed beyond the imperial frontiers, he could walk in the knowledge that he had been faithful to the end, a servant of the Logos to the last. His sacrifice was not in vain. The light of truth could never be fully extinguished.